Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
Welcome to Poetry Today. Today we are kidnapping poetry and we're going to do flash fiction. I'm Lois Barr. I'm a professor of Spanish at Lake Forest College, and my guest today is Karen Gordon. She is a textile designer and a poet, and she's worked in public relations. She's done many, many things. I think it would be well to start off with when you tell people what is flash fiction. When you say you're going to do flash fiction, people ask, what is it? It has many names: micro fiction, sudden fiction, short stories. So Karen, how would you define microfiction?
Microfiction is a piece of work that can be as little as 4 lines. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there are no metaphors, much less metaphors than there are in poetry. And there are no adjectives. It's bare bones, but it does tell a story.
Yes, and it's something that, like a good poem, really stays with you. You read it and you want to reread it.
Yes.
Our friend Charlotte DiGregorio, who does haiku, often reads her poems twice. And one would hope that when someone reads a flash fiction, a piece of microfiction, that they would reread and discover. And I think the bare bones, the importance of the bare bones that you talk about, is that it gives room for the reader to bring something to the story, something of their own. Mm-hmm. In the Spanish literary tradition, which is where I come from, or it's my training, there's a very famous story that's only 7 words long. It's by Augusto Monterroso. He's a Guatemalan writer. I'll do it in Spanish. It doesn't translate well. Cuando despertó, el dinosaurio todavía estaba vivo. When he woke up, the dinosaur was still alive. Now in English, it's not ambiguous. In Spanish, there's no subject to when he woke up. It could be when he, when she, when the dinosaur woke up. So when my students look at it for the first time, they say, well, what is that? That's nothing. Then when they start talking about it, the story has so many possibilities. And then, of course, everybody in Spanish fights to have something shorter than Monterroso, shorter than a 7-word story. So there's Max Aub, who's a Spanish/Mexican writer. He, after the Spanish Civil War, lived in exile in Mexico, and he wrote a 6-word story, Lo maté porque era de Vinaroz. I killed him because he was from Vinaroz. And so for a Spaniard, the fact that he's from Vinaroz, that's a specific region, it brings back the Civil War. It gives you a lot of room to think about that story, but he actually wrote something shorter than Monterroso. And then, of course, the Ernest Hemingway's is an example that you see in a lot of anthologies, a very short story, 6 words. For sale, baby shoes never worn. Yeah, it's a sad story. It's a sad story. So I think we should get into Karin's stories. I think it's important to know you are from Denmark, but I think the situation when you were born, because we just told the producer Gilda Lesser that you write World War II stories, and she said you're too young. So tell us a little bit when you were born and what the first set of stories you're going to read will be about.
I was born in 1938 in Denmark, so I was 2 when the Germans marched in. And you have memories from you were 2. You do. People don't believe it, but you do. And I was 7 when the Germans marched out. And in that time, the Germans had taken over our place where we lived, and nobody could take in a family of 4. We were 4. I have a sister. So we were scattered around. And I was scattered with people who liked me and treated me well. I was scattered with one who would beat me up. I never knew when I would see my parents. And because it was hard to get apartments, I was 11 before we had an apartment as a family. So that is my background. Since then, I have lived in Sweden, then Manhattan, then Switzerland, and now here. So I have lived in many languages. And when you live in many languages, although you have studied them and know them well, you have to learn the essential words. And that's why I took to poetry. I heard Francis Bacon at one of his exhibits say, I like poetry because it says a lot in a few words. And I thought, that's me. So I took to poetry. And now I'm into flash fiction as well.
Yeah. And I think the first piece that you're going to read is actually a poem. So I guess we can justify being on Poetry Today with your, with your first piece.
I call it Tølløse because that was the village where I was born and grew up. In my childhood kitchen, a mousetrap with 8 holes stood empty in the evening, full in the morning. To trap a mouse cost a grain of wheat. 8 grains a day diminished our rations. We counted our ribs. They counted their dead. Snow drifted through the walls like feathers from a pillow fight. Our blankets were spittle and dust. We stopped counting ribs and counted our dead.
Yeah. It's a beautiful introduction.
Then, as the war wore on, German soldiers were injured and died frequently, and I saw what happened to some of them, dying on the shunting tracks. Toward the end of the war, German soldiers lay rotting in railroad cars parked on shunting tracks a few hundred yards from my aunt's orchard. With the curiosity of a child, I went to look, hoping my aunt wouldn't catch me. As I got close, I heard a low humming with the voltage of pain, giving me goosebumps. Soldiers from the front lay on bunks stacked 3 high like stale bread, their faces weeping masks, their bandages stiff and black from dried up blood, the uniforms reduced to tatters. No door or window ajar for a feather of fresh air, no one to change their dressings or slip a wet washcloth between their lips. Maggots thrived on open wounds. Flies swam on pools of pus. The inside of the windows was smeared with filth. A man with one leg missing, the other in a grungy cast, locked his bulging eyes with mine. With great difficulty, he lifted a finger and began tapping on the window as if to give me a message. Perhaps he was the father of the boy soldier hiding behind the raspberry bush in my aunt's orchard, the one I gave an apple to. But his arm sank down from the effort. His eyes went blank. A lip trembled and froze. And when I used to teach writing, I always said, you write about what you can't forget. And I've never forgotten this.
So, first of all, you said there are no metaphors, but you have a beautiful simile right in the middle there of the soldiers stacked in like loaves of bread, like stale loaves of bread, which gives you the crowding, and there's a wonderful contrast of the bread with their putrid conditions. So
starvation.
Yeah. Okay.
The soldiers marched and sang and sang and marched. Fight songs. German soldiers marched through the cobblestone streets of Odense in perfect formation, their black boots spit polished to metal, their guns held close to the chest like girls clutching a favorite doll. They sang and marched and sang, their voices blending, harmonizing as if they were members of a church choir. They enunciated so clearly, I learned their songs by heart before I learned their language. 50 years later, when I was a guest on a sailboat on Lake Michigan, another guest pulled a Nazi flag with a bullet hole from a trouser pocket, pinned it to the boom, saluted and sang one of the songs I learned as a child and now understood. The song was, We fahren gegen England, England, England. We are going to capture England, England, thump, 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 England.
Whoa, that must have been uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable, especially because my husband was with me and he's Jewish. So, yeah, it was bad.
Yeah. Oh.
Also, everything was rationed. We had ration cards, but we couldn't even get what was on the cards. Hunger. A German soldier stood guard outside the railway station in Odense with a gun slung over his shoulder. He was about to eat a hot dog when an officer approached. In one swift move, the soldier tossed the hot dog to the ground, lobbed a quick Heil Hitler into the air and stood to attention. A mangy dog snatched it up before I could get to it. So. And housing was so scarce, so for half a year or more, I lived with my mother. End of game. We got a room for my mother and me in an old man's house in Nonnebo in exchange for her cooking and cleaning. One day I played in the snow with children from the neighboring farms when I heard my mother screaming. I ran to the house, saw her banging at the back door with a stick scrubber. The old man, knowing we had nowhere else to go, had locked us out and was sitting behind the window dangling the key. I was furious for my mother for making a scene in front of my new friends who'd gathered hooting and jeering. Even if the old man let us back in, I knew we would never play again. Dubious company. And then we found rooms with a Russian countess. And it was not a very nice place. Dubious company. When my parents went to work, they left me alone in our tiny rooms in the attic where I was cold, lonesome, and afraid of fleas jumping around me like hail. So I went downstairs to join the other boarders, pimps, black market racketeers, thieves, and whores who worked nights and spent afternoons lounging around the living room. In spite of the criminal activities, they looked out for me. One of the whores sprayed me with strong cologne and spent hours grooming and rearranging my hair. The other one let me try on her earrings. Both pulled me on their laps. I sank into the ample bosoms, pretending they were my mother. A man who could neither speak nor hear taught me to play chess through patience and gestures. We developed our own language, which gave me a sense of achievement, as I was the only one who could communicate with him without pen and paper. The racketeers gave me chocolate and candy, which were only available on the black market. In spite of them befriending me, they regularly broke into our rooms to steal whatever they could trade on the market.
Now that story breaks a lot of the rules of flash fiction, which is that you can only have one or two characters, and yet those characters are so vivid because you've chosen the exact right detail, the ample bosoms, the contrast between the racketeers giving you chocolate candy and then robbing you when you least expected it. So, yeah, I think it's always something really good when you break the rules.
I did not break rules. That's how good I am. This story is about the only time during the war where I felt happy. Salt and sun, with the ease of a single shadow, Aunt Elsa and I glide over rippled sand in the shallows off the coast of Kerteminde. I'm on her back, my arms around her neck, and float free. Around us, jellyfish open and close like umbrellas trailing pink streamers. At low tide, tiny islands appear for me to explore until they vanish in the waves. With a flounder head tied to a string, I lie on a swim dock, lower the bait into the water and wait for crabs to latch on with their tiny pincers. Once my bucket is full, I empty it and start again. The crabs, no bigger than a 25-euro coin, are pale as chalk. When the doors to the fish auction close, we gather our towels and go to a weather-beaten shack with a rusty shingle squeaking from a nail. We buy crisp waffle cones with vanilla ice cream topped with meringue and a dollop of strawberry jam.
Well, do you think that you still love to be in the sea and the scuba diving because of this very pleasurable event?
Probably. I feel so at home, so free in water, and my best dreams take place in water. I might be upside down, but it's always blue and happy.
Wow, wow. I love that one. You know, my favorite poem of yours of all time, and when you say you write about what you remember, I remember Elsa, your pig. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, about Elsa, or would you?
Well, we had a pig during the war, and everyone tried to do something where they could make a living because rations were so. So we had a pig, and one day she was slaughtered, which was normal. And I watched the slaughtering. We lived in the countryside. I didn't see her being killed, but I saw her being cut up. But after the war, she came to stand for everything I lost. Mm-hmm. She was a pet of mine. So I put her into a story, so she stands for my childhood. The day I turned 5, the village ran out of food, and they took my pet pig, Elsa. And so somebody robbed her from us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought that was a very good way of talking about I lost my childhood instead of saying, oh, it was so hard, I suffered so much. This says it much better.
Well, and that brings us around to the idea that there really is metaphor if it's a good flash story. It's where something that you are talking about really stands for, as you say,
right.
Elsa is how you lost your childhood during the war. So we were asked before we started, so do you just drink, take a slug of booze and then sit down and write these? They're so short. And so what is the craft? What is the process in microfiction? What do you think?
Well, everything I write needs three inspirations. And once I have three, I can sit down. It might be long, it might be short. Or I might just say, you know, I would really like to write about this experience. And I'll sit down. I might write page after page after page. And then I'll see what's good in there and glean from that. So it's a long process, although it might end up very small. And I try to be very concise, which I think is important, and use words everyone understands. So I don't have a special formula, but if something I want to write about, I sit down and begin, even if I have no idea where to start. I get a start somehow in several pages. And it can take a day, it can take 3 weeks, and that doesn't bother me. Either way, I love the whole process of writing.
Right, yeah. And I think you've said before that you are ruthless with the adjectives.
Pretty much.
Out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And adverbs, I think, too,
Yes.
tend to pull things down when if you can show us and
Yes.
use a strong verb, you're gonna have a much stronger piece of fiction or memoir or poem, whatever it is you're doing. So I was going to read something kind of in the middle here by an Argentine writer, Ana Maria Schua. She's about my age, and she's been called the queen of flash fiction by El País. It's the Spanish New York Times. And so her work has been published everywhere. She's been translated. There's a couple books of her fiction, quick fix and microfictions. By two different translators, Rhonda Dahl Buchanan and Stephen Stewart. This one is called Overzealous Thieves. They stole the stereo and the candelabra and the food from the refrigerator and the crystal ashtrays and the television and even the air conditioner. And then they stole the refrigerator itself and the television stand and the rest of the furniture and the cash stashed in the strongbox kept in the safe in the bedroom wall. And then they stole the safe and the bedroom wall as well. Then they stole all the other walls and the bronze plumbing running through them, and the cement foundations underneath them, and the roof above them. And then they stole the trees and flowers from the garden, and then the garden itself, and the soil on which the house had been built, and they stole the granite substratum, and various additional geologic layers, including one particularly extensive solid mass of pure basalt, and the pockets of water trapped inside it, and they kept on robbing and robbing until they set off an eruption of lava from a volcanic explosion which completely buried all evidence of their exploits, along with the immediate environs, the entire town, and a sizable portion of the greater metropolitan area in which they had carried out their crimes, and various sections of the adjacent geography too, and finally, fittingly, themselves, those bungling, impetuous, and most of all, overrated thieves. And I think this story has political meaning too, because I think it could be the story of the disappeared in Argentina without really going. And I think that also your stories about the war, I think flash fiction works so well because these are painful stories that perhaps you can only take in a small dose. And
maybe for the reader, but for me, I think writing is not analytical or, I forgot the word now, but it's cathartic. So you ask questions you didn't know you had. So I know I suffered during the war, but I also know that it was then, and I can look at it now. You have to have a distance to see what it did to you.
Right.
And I know what it did to me, and I can write and talk about it now. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's not therapeutical to write. That's what I wanted to say. But it is cathartic.
Cathartic.
I really
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah, because if it's just therapy, the art isn't there.
That's probably
But
right.
the Aristotelian thing of making that pulse quicken, if your stories do that, then they are works of art.
I also think you put it down in a way that pleases you and say, yes, that's exactly what I experienced. So it's like looking at it from the outside in a way, although you're inside it too.
Yeah. Now, I should have said before that in some ways, the first set of stories are flash memoir or micro memoir. Now, I would like to end on some of your what are a blend of fiction with your own experiences. So we'll hear about some weddings. We'll go to a happier note.
I tend to write in first person because I think that's so immediate and it brings the reader in. I may not be in the stories, but this is what I write. The Mad Hatter. The wide-brimmed hat I brought from Chicago is not substantial enough for a wedding in the Church of England, my sister-in-law says, and suggests I rent one from the Mad Hatter where she rents hers. The Hatter fits me with a Palladian villa with 4 columns in front, adding a foot to my height. I tower over my husband as we take our seats in a pew, and women's oversized hats crisscross the sanctuary like jagged skylines. When the organ pipes up and the bride in jade green silk comes down the aisle on the arm of my Jewish nephew, a hooded man follows with a huge wooden cross casting a shadow over him. I pray he doesn't drop the cross on my nephew for killing Jesus. At the reception, I add my hat box to similar boxes lining the walls of the women's wardrobe like Victorian wedding cakes. I ask a niece when we can take our hats off. She tells me to keep it on till the mother of the bride has removed hers, which I hope happens before I keel over from the weight of the villa. When I return the hat to the Mad Hatter, he asks which hat I would like to reserve for the races at Ascot. I tell him a summer cottage.
I love that one.
They rent hats in England. You will even go in and say, I'm going to a ball, a reception, and find a hat, and then choose a dress that would fit the hat.
All right, I think we have time for one more. So let's do At the Theater.
At the theater, my view of Marie Antoinette and her ladies in waiting is blinded by a man texting. At intermission, I tell him it's rude to use a phone during a performance. With a smile, he partly undresses to show me a catheter rigged to his chest and a pouch of heart medicine in a fanny pack. His phone regulates the flow. I fall all over myself begging forgiveness for my insensitivity. He asks if my accent is Dutch. When I say Danish, he tells me he was invited to a black tie affair at the opening of the new opera house in Copenhagen with royalty in attendance. Royalty attending means white tie. Serious heart problems don't fly, but I let it slide. I go to the ladies' lounge to pee and find his wife sobbing. She throws her arm around my neck and thanks me for complaining to her husband. The fool has never been to Denmark, but lives vicariously through Royalty magazine. His cell phone doesn't regulate anything. He was texting his girlfriend.
That's my favorite. I love that one. I love
Good.
it. So I want to thank Jennifer Dodson of Highland Park Poetry And thanks to our producer, Gilda Lesser, for inviting us today and for producing the program. And especially thanks, Karen, for your wonderful work.